So I'm here to talk to you today about PCS tender and the benefits and its ease of use. So what is PCS tender? The assumption out there is that PCS tender is part of Public Contracts Scotland. So they're not, they're completely two different systems, although single sign-on does exist. So you can log into Public Contracts Scotland tender from Public Contracts Scotland, but they are completely different systems. Public Contracts Scotland, which is the smaller screen there, is used to advertise public sector contract opportunities. This is where suppliers can find new contracting opportunities. Public Contracts Scotland tender is the smaller brother of Public Contracts Scotland. This is where buyers run high-value, high-risk procurement exercises. So they run the tenders through Public Contracts Scotland tenders. Suppliers can respond to PQQs and ITTs through the system, and the buyer will complete the evaluation through PCS tender. Some low-value procurements can be done through Public Contracts Scotland. Sandy touched on it in his earlier presentation. These tend to be tenders that are up to a value of £50,000, and it's using the quick quote and mailbox functionality that some might be familiar with. Once the tender is complete, the contract award notice is placed on Public Contracts Scotland. So the benefits of using PCS tender for suppliers. So the electronic version of the SPQQ has been created in the system. It's embedded in the system for the buyer to use. The supplier can answer the SPQQ questions, store them in the system and reuse them multiple times. So a gentleman asked earlier on about the functionality that holds your answers to your questions and they can be reused. It's in this system, Public Contracts Scotland tender. The system holds all past tender submissions for future reference, so you can always go back and look at the tenders that you submitted if you're wanting to check how to respond to a tender or anything like that. The system, PCS tender, holds a record of past tenders that you've answered. Suppliers can communicate with buyers in PCS tender through the messaging service. All conversations that you have with the buyer through the messaging service are stored, so you can go back to the conversation for future reference if you're not sure about anything. And suppliers can edit responses up until the tender deadline submission expires. So you have up until the expiry that the buyer's put to make changes to your answers in the system. So when to use PCS tender? So not all contracting authorities use PCS tender. The system is targeted towards those that have a high volume of PQQs and ITTs. Currently we have 50 in-scope organisations, so people like Glasgow City Council are using the system. Once you have identified a notice on PCS and clicked into the further information, it will be clear from the text at the top of the notice that the contracting authority is using PCS tender to carry out their tender exercise. So you can see for the example that I've put on the screen that the buyer's notified in the contract notice that they're going to be using PCS tender to run the tender exercise. Suppliers should note that PCS tender project code is highlighted in the slide, as this will help identify the correct project in PCS tender. So you keep a note of that code. When you go into PCS tender, you search for that code and up pops the tender opportunity. If the buyer has indicated that they are using PCS tender, suppliers should register in the PCS tender portal. You can access PCS tender online. You only need to register in PCS tender if the buyer is using the system to carry out the tender exercise. So you don't have to register on PCS tender. It's only if the buyer's put in the instructions in the contract notice that they're going to be using the system to run through the tender. All opportunities are advertised in Public Contracts Scotland, not Public Contracts Scotland tender. So if you're not registered on PCST, you're not going to miss out on anything as long as you're registered on Public Contracts Scotland. To register it's really as simple as 3 steps. So it's completely free to register in PCS tender as it is Public Contracts Scotland. All you need to do is hit the register as a supplier button, agree to the terms and conditions of the website and start to build your supplier profile in the system as per the bottom screenshot there. So managing your profile. So once you have completed the registration stage, you will be taken into your dashboard area. In here you will find the Manage Profile section. So this is where you'll be able to find the tender opportunities that have been advertised through Public Contracts Scotland. The screenshot demonstrates the search functionality. You can search by the project code that I mentioned earlier in the last slide. The buyer has the project code's in the contract notice, so all you need to do is search for the contract, the project code, and the tender opportunity should appear. When you find the correct PQQ or ITT, all you have to do is express interest in the project and it will move to your My PQQ area. So responding to the PQQ, so suppliers should read the question details and provide answers appropriate to the question. So make sure that you read the actual question and the response you're putting is in direct relation to that question. Complete the sections in the PQQ, validate your response and submit. It really is as simple as that. If you have completed a PQQ in the system, PCS tender will store your answer You can reuse your answer for future PQQs that you may be interested in. The system will pre-populate the answer. It's up to the supplier to ensure that the stored answer meets the contract-specific criteria. So again, it's just making sure that if you have put in a submission in the past, that the answer that you're going to for the future tenders meets the criteria of the question. Previous responses may not always meet the tender-specific criteria. Therefore, just to stress, it is important that you make sure you're checking the response to the question and the question meets the criteria that's asked. So, answering the actual questions. So, the example on the screen is from the economic and financial section of the SPQQ that a buyer may use when creating a PQQ. Suppliers should read the question in detail and provide an answer. In this case, it's an attachment question, so you attach a file to the system that's appropriate to the question. All sections contain questions that either prompt the supplier to upload an attachment, in this case a copy of your financial accounts, select from a drop-down menu, or provide a free text answer. So, building your profile. So, a couple of examples on the screen of the sections that a supplier may wish to complete. The first section is a basic profile, where the supplier is asked whether they are an SME and are prompted to enter their details. The next section is the extended profile. This is where a supplier begins to answer the questions contained within the SPQQ. Note, the system informs you how complete the section is and whether the question is optional or mandatory. You can amend the basic profile questions, but the initial response to these is given at the registration stage. So where to go for help? So help in relation to the PQQ or the ITT, the first point of contact should always be the buyer. So if you're unsure about any of the questions in the PQQ or the ITT, please contact the buyer. Help in relation to aspects of the system functionality, you should contact the PCS Tender Help Desk. The information is on the screen. The help files contain some useful guidance to suppliers, including response guides, how to respond to a tender, how to add users to the system. We've got some good supplier videos in there, and there's an explanation of how the PCS Tender single sign-on works. Help in relation to bidding for public contracts should be through the Supplier Development Programme. So if you were here for Sandy's presentation this morning, the Supplier Development Programme is the place to go to get help on bidding for public contracts. And we were going to have a short demonstration of the system here, but because of time constraints, I'll just pass you on to Andy Kearney.
The next 10-15 minutes, we're going to provide you with a whirlwind tour of all things e-invoicing, ranging from the new EU directive, the benefits that can be achieved, through to how easy it is for you, the supplier, to start sending e-invoices via our solution. If your business deals with invoices, you could be losing thousands of pounds each year due to the labour-intensive manual procedures that relate to the invoice process. If you're looking to improve your invoice process by reducing costs, saving paper and increasing visibility of payments, then e-invoicing automation could help you bring your e-invoicing procedures to the next level. Okay, so what is e-invoicing? I'm sure you're all very aware of the term e-invoicing, but what does the E in e-invoicing actually stand for? Is it efficient? Is it easy, effective, exciting, or electronic? Well, I think we all know the answer is electronic. However, all these apply to the Scottish Government e-invoicing solution. I accept that I might be pushing it a bit to say that e-invoicing is exciting, but I'm sure that the other 4 E's can definitely be applied. Onto the directives. This is one of the key drivers for the Scottish Government to introduce e-invoicing across the Scottish public sector. This directive mandates that public bodies must be able to accept e-invoices and that these e-invoices must be received and processed without any manual intervention. Public bodies can continue to receive paper invoices, but there must be formal agreement between the public body and the supplier first and foremost. The directive does not mandate the suppliers issue e-invoices, and the directive also mandates the e-invoicing for contracts that are covered by EU procurement. So that's basically saying only contracts of the EU procurement directive level are applicable. The directive must be brought into force by 27th November 2018 for all central government bodies and NHS boards. Local authorities have a further 12 months to postpone that if they so wish. Whilst the directive covers high-value contracts, our solution will be available for all suppliers regardless of contract value, so that we can ensure that all suppliers benefit from the efficiencies that e-invoicing will deliver. Across Scotland, payment performance is typically, with most public bodies paying on contract terms. The Scottish Government pays 97% of its invoices within 10 working days. And whilst this is not the norm across the public sector, there is recognition that this is something that should be aspired to. It is recognised that the matching and payment of invoices is a very manual-intensive process. E-invoicing isn't widely deployed across Scotland, however, and there are pockets of good practice, and some public bodies have enabled the capability for a selection of suppliers and commodities. Most public bodies have yet to dip their toes in the water, and this could be due to a number of reasons: time, money, resources, capability, supplier buy-in, and the complexity of the invoicing market, to name but a few. To address this, the Scottish Government have delivered e-invoicing capability for its national e-commerce shared service, which will help to standardise e-invoicing procedures and decrease the fragmented approach to e-invoicing as a whole. We are now in the throes of implementing e-invoicing across local authorities, central government, universities and colleges. Our solution does not require suppliers to make any technical changes to the invoice and billing process, and most importantly, there are no costs to suppliers to transact with our solution. So yes, it is a free system, you'll all be glad to hear. On to some facts. This got us kind of thinking in terms of how much time do suppliers actually spend on issuing invoices. To try and demonstrate this, I've done a bit of research on the average time it takes to issue an invoice and how much time is dedicated to supporting this process. This is a very rough and ready calculation. However, the point I'm trying to demonstrate is that a lot of suppliers' time is spent managing the end-to-end invoice process. The industry standard is in the region of 5 minutes. I personally think this is a bit on the conservative side. However, we'll go with this as our baseline. We'll caveat this, though, as this, of course, will change depending on your own internal procedures. According to a survey that was carried out by a well-known service provider, the average worker from a small and medium-sized business spends about 17 hours a month on financial procedures, equal to 2 full working days on activity potentially unrelated to a person's role. In that 2-day period, the most time-consuming exercises include responding to customer queries, creating and sending invoices, and renewing invoices to be paid. So if you're the lucky person that had to issue 4.8 million invoices that are received by local authorities each year, and this would take you in the region of 45 years, which I think most people would be a bit disappointed with. Thankfully, not all of us need to spend the next 45 years to support an invoice process. As we all know, the status quo for suppliers and invoices is that it tends to be a slow, manual, paper-based process. Sometimes as a result, supplier credit control departments can often struggle to manage both the volumes and the end-to-end invoice process, with some of the key time wasting areas being managing disputes, chasing payments, and reconciling accounts to take into consideration unpaid invoices. Ultimately, all of these tasks above are wasting time and money. We have the answer, or so we think. By introducing e-invoicing into your organisation, there are some great efficiencies to be made. For example, a few of these benefits are reducing your invoice processing costs by taking away any manual intervention and making the end-to-end process electronic. You can reduce credit control labour by automating your invoice process. This helps to drive good practice, which in turn helps you to reduce the amount of time that is spent on dealing with lost invoices or handling queries. Your payment at time percentage will increase as the overall process is more efficient, and with no manual intervention required, this reduces the risk of any human error. You could also say that by automating the invoice process, it reduces the likelihood of invoices going missing or sitting in someone's in tray. E-invoicing increases the visibility of where invoices are in the payment process. Ultimately, saving time during the overall invoice process will lead to saving money. Moving on to the actual technology of how e-invoicing is actually working. We think it's very simple. On the first segment, you see that supplier sends an invoice to a unique email address for each public body it deals with. A variety of formats are supported, and the most popular being PDF, which must be machine generated. The second segment, the e-invoicing solution receives the email and reads the data embedded within the PDF and turns this data into an electronic invoice. The invoicing solution then performs a number of validation checks before issuing it to the public body for matching and payment. It does not matter which accounting package you use. It doesn't even matter if you don't use an accounting package, as we can deal with both Word and Excel formats. The simplicity of our solution is that you as a supplier do not need to make any changes to your current e-invoicing process or invoicing process. Hopefully this demonstrates just how simple the e-invoicing solution can be, and I'm going to pass you over to Nicola, who's going to give you a bit more of an update as to where we are today.
Well, we started our e-invoicing service in April 2013, and we've been actively engaging with all public bodies, with the local authority sector, by far leading on adoption and standardisation. As you can see, 6 local authorities are live, 3 are progressing with implementations, and we are in discussions with a large number of other local authorities, central government bodies, universities and colleges. We're taking a centrally managed approach to supplier adoption and onboarding so that we can ensure that suppliers servicing national and sectorial contracts are brought on board quickly and only once. Therefore, at this stage, only suppliers that we have contacted and have onboarded are issuing invoices to the solution. We have taken this approach to drive standardisation throughout the processes and reduce duplication of effort across the Scottish public sector supply base. To date, we have not faced any resistance from suppliers, but some have been particularly challenging in terms of progressing. This can be due to a number of factors, for example, limited resource, difficult to find out who the correct contact should be, and internal processes. We're not just looking at national and sectoral contracts. Individual user organisations can identify local suppliers which they would like onboarded and will undertake this activity themselves. All we ask is that they notify us of the suppliers so that we can keep this master list. Savings. To date, we have currently 75 suppliers who have been onboarded to issue e-invoices. And since e-invoicing went live with West Lothian Council in April 2013, the solution has captured over 20,000 invoices. This is where I'm looking for some audience participation. Do we have anybody in the room from Arco, Campbell's, Pertemps or Yorkshire Purchasing that they've already to start to reap the benefits of e-invoicing and to date have sent in over 2,400 invoices and an overall saving of just £14,500. You can see on the table what the supplier savings are to date. These savings are based on the Belentis 2014 report figure, which state that there is a saving of £5.89 per invoice if you move to e-invoicing. This figure is just a benchmark and will fluctuate depending on your own internal processes. Now that we've shown you how easy the solution is and what the potential savings are, hopefully your next question is, how do I join and what do I need to do? To ensure that you achieve the benefits of e-invoicing, from the word go, there are a few prerequisites that we need you to do. First one is that you must have the ability to send a system-generated invoice. What do I mean by this? I mean an invoice that is generated from any accounting package. You need to send in a valid invoice. Your invoices must include purchase order number, VAT number, and invoice values, to name a few. If you're not sure of what should be included in an invoice, either speak to your local authority, accounts payable team, check the HMRC website, or you can email our e-invoicing mailbox and we can provide you with a sample. Either collectively or across the whole Scottish public sector, or singularly with one public body, you must send a minimum of 250 invoices a year. This is our cut-off point to ensure that there is a cost benefit to adopting suppliers to use the solution. However, we do appreciate that that not all suppliers will achieve these volumes. Therefore, if you produce invoices below this threshold, either we, the Scottish Government, or the local buying authority that you work with will look at these on a case-by-case basis. More importantly, we also need commitment and dedicated resource. The key lesson that we have learnt to date is that the majority of issues are related to invalid invoices being received, and to quickly resolve these, we need both the supplier and the public body to work together. So, what is a valid invoice? This may be very obvious to the suppliers in the room. However, a large amount of our invoices that we have received to date have failed the validation process due to some key information not being included. We need this information as this is the mandatory information that is required to match our purchase orders. One or any of this information being missed, then the invoice will fail validation and ultimately may result in your payment being delayed. The invoice should be a mirror copy of the key information that is on the purchase order. Some of the common problems that we have encountered to date is missing item numbers, the adding of discounts or delivery charges at the invoice stage. If included, these will cause your invoice to fail. This is why we are encouraging suppliers to work closely with public bodies and ensuring that you have a valid invoice prior to going live with e-invoicing. Once you know that you have all this in place, there is only a few steps that you need to take to start sending e-invoices. Firstly, you need to contact the public bodies you do business with to check if they are using the e-invoicing solution. Depending on how many public bodies you do business with, you may need to contact several organisations individually. Secondly, obtain the email address that has been set up specifically for each of these public bodies. Third, and finally, start sending your PD invoices to this email address. It will be as simple as this if you have made sure that the key supplier considerations that I've just outlined on the earlier slide are put in place. If not, there is every chance that your invoices will fail validation and fall into the exceptions category and may delay payment. Like any new solution that has been implemented, there is always teething problems and key lessons to be learnt. This project is no different. What our aim is when we are working with both suppliers and buying organisations is that from the minute that you go live, we want to try and ensure that there are minimal exceptions and that you are reaping the benefits of e-invoicing from the very start. The more effort that is done from the front end in ensuring that the current processes supports e-invoicing, then there will be less problems in managing exceptions for all involved. All these lessons learned are very easy to resolve, and should you want to discuss how you can manage these, you can either email our mailbox or come and see Andy and I because we're going to be around for the lunch. Thank you very much.